And as I've said earlier today, today's guest is Roger Blood from the Housing Advisory Board. And Roger has all sorts of experience about housing development and government's interface with housing in Brookline. And I'm delighted to have him on today. Roger, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Tom. Appreciate it, Tommy.
Roger, let's get started and learn a little bit about you. The simple question is, well, what makes you so knowledgeable about housing? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with housing throughout your career.
Well, Tom, I've had a long career. It's been almost entirely in housing. First began as a graduate student. I was a research assistant to my professor on a contract with the city of New York to study the performance of its rent control program. So that was the beginning. Spent many years with a nationwide mortgage insurance company as an executive. Perhaps more interesting, in the latter part of my career, I had the opportunity and really the adventure of working and traveling in about 20 different countries around the world with the national government's housing ministries to help them develop policies and programs to promote mostly affordable home ownership. And that was largely through the auspices of the World Bank. So to the extent that Brookline folks have heard the term "think globally, act locally," I suppose in the area of housing, that's been my connection with the Housing Advisory Board over the years, while at the same time working in countries across the world.
And you mentioned the HAB, the Housing Advisory Board. Tell us a little bit about the HAB and what that is and what its role has been sort of over the last years or decades.
Well, the Housing Advisory Board was the brainchild mainly of David Treach and another gentleman after the transition out of the Brookline's era of rent control. There were warrant articles passed that created the Housing Advisory Board, and I've always emphasized the middle initial is A for advisory. Has a great mission, but not a huge amount of power. And that article also included, that created the HAB, the initiation of what's known as inclusionary zoning, which involves whenever multifamily housing is developed, that a certain percentage of that developed housing must include an affordable housing contribution by the developer, either on the site or through various alternatives. The HAB was given the responsibility for overseeing that article, which we've done over the years, I think with some success. And then I've always referred to kind of the third leg of the town's affordable housing stool that was developed at that time, going back to the late 80s, was the establishment, at least on paper, of an affordable housing trust. Over 100 municipalities have housing trusts in Massachusetts now, but Brookline was one of the very first to begin a housing trust, which has funded almost $15 million over recent years and done a lot of different things with it. So the HAB has those administrative roles. We're the trustees, the fiduciaries of the housing trust. And then in addition to inclusionary zoning, we're charged with developing housing policy, evaluating housing needs, and providing support in that realm to both mainly the select board and to the planning board.
So there's a lot of different parts of government and finance and frankly, people's homes, people's lives embedded there. So I know the HAB is busy. Maybe you can give us some examples of some things that the HAB has been involved in within the last couple of years or is currently juggling to give us a sense for some tangible things the HAB has done that maybe we would recognize or have heard about.
Sure. We're charged with both promoting but also vetting proposals for developments that include affordable housing, not just under inclusionary zoning, but probably more recognizable affordable housing developments by nonprofit sponsors, and certainly as well as partnering with the Brookline Housing Authority. So some of the familiar projects that have gotten a lot of attention from the HAB and money, frankly, that has made these projects feasible would include St. Aidan's, the 32 Dummer Street down in North Brookline, sponsored by the Housing Authority, up towards the other end of town, Olmsted Hill, up on Fisher Hill. And then more recently in the stages of development, some major projects, including recently the redevelopment of the Newbury College campus with the development by Well Tower that the HAB negotiated to contribute $6.5 million from the profits of that development for the Brookline Housing Authority to construct, which will soon begin, a complete redevelopment and enlargement of what's known as the Colonel Floyd apartments, senior housing in Coolidge Corner. And finally, probably known by everybody, but in some form or another, the Waldo Durgan project right in Coolidge Corner behind the Brookline Booksmith, where there will be a large housing elevator building, 143 housing units, along with a hotel and some retail. Some of those have been rather long and complex projects, but I guess success stories. And going forward, we've been working for several years to try to realize a vision and a new concept of developing affordable housing over existing municipal parking lots. And some of your viewers may have heard of the work we've been doing on the so-called Kent Station Street site directly across from Brookline Village. That's still going to take some effort to make it come to reality, but we're confident that we'll see something break ground there in the next couple of years.
One thing I'd like you to talk about maybe a little bit more is and I will assert that the HAB was kind of out in front on this idea that the rest of us woke up to a little bit later, and that is local preference and how subsidized units are allocated or who has access and what that looks like. Can you just walk through maybe the way Brookline used to do it not too long ago and how it does it now and why that difference is important?
Sure. From the very beginning, Brookline and almost any other, all the other communities I'm aware of that have had affordable housing developments through lotteries to choose the people, that being because there's dozens and hundreds of times as many people that need and want affordable housing than is able to be produced. The state housing agency had set a standard under so-called local preference, whereby municipalities who ran their own lotteries or oversaw them done by developers in some cases could not have more than 70% of a lottery be earmarked the winners for those who live and or sometimes work in the town. So Brookline had just not given that a lot of thought. We just went along with the 70%. It was understood in the affordable housing world. The state didn't try to change it. And so at one point, when there became an interest in how can different parts of the town government, including the housing sphere, promote more diversity, and we looked at how those lotteries might help in that regard. And I've attended almost every one personally. I think it's a great experience to see who comes and aspires, so to speak. That we might break the line on that and be the first community to reduce that percentage of local preference in a lottery that you're looking at a two-tier. You run that part first, and the local people get theirs, and then the rest is left for other applicants, pre-qualified who live elsewhere. Earlier, we had added Metco families, Metco parents to the local residency requirement. But at this point, we decided and have fully supported initiating this a reduction. We didn't know how much we were going to go, but we eventually went to the select board and the HAB basically adopted a reduction from 70% to 25%. There's a lot of reason why you need to keep, or we felt we needed to keep some local preference, including, for example, current residents of the housing authority. who wanted to move up from, say, low income to moderate income housing. But we were able to, our staff did a terrific job demonstrating, looking at the experience of lotteries and some other statistics, that it was a very sure thing that our lottery pools would be much more racially and ethnically diverse if we would make this move. And so it's been adopted earlier this year, and that's the way we're running the lotteries now. And our affordable housing sponsors, for example, such as Two Life, were thrilled that Brookline was able and willing to do this. It aligns much better with their mission.
I love this story because, look, everyone in our community can do better in terms of racial equity, and our town as a government can do better and must do better in terms of racial equity. On the other hand, there are things that we have done for a long time, or things that we are now doing that move us in that direction. And while it is important that we continue to demand better from ourselves, I think it's also important to say out loud the things we're doing that are worthy of praise. And I think, speaking for myself, that what you just described is an example of something that we really showed leadership on as a town and are doing it the right way. And I'm grateful for you and the HAB for sort of having this wisdom and seeing it, and for going through and putting it all the way into action. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the CPA, the Community Preservation Act. Some of our viewers will be familiar with it. Of course, it was just voted on fairly recently. But I'm wondering if you could, number one, just kind of help people, remind people what the CPA is, but then two, sort of explain how housing is a part of it, and then how the HAB as a part of housing relates to the CPA in Brookline.
Well, it's a very interesting topic and a great opportunity. And part of your question remains to be played out, and the HAB will hopefully be playing a significant role in that regard. The Community Preservation Act was put on the ballot and passed by the voters last year, last spring, and it basically adds a 1% surcharge to annual property tax bills for three purposes: affordable, or what they call community housing, parks and green space, and historical preservation. At this point, over 100 other Massachusetts communities have also adopted the CPA. Brookline is now one of them. The projected revenue, annual revenue from this additional tax source will be an estimated roughly $3 million a year, starting this coming fiscal year. And for those three uses, a community such as Brookline, and I do expect Brookline will find a way and a process to devote a significant, if not the major share of these new proceeds toward affordable housing, including low and moderate income housing. There will be a new committee formed called the CPC, Community Preservation Committee. We successfully advocated it, as you may recall, Tommy, at town meeting, for that committee to have a permanent seat for one housing advisory board member. And I think we're going to have an excellent representative, not me, on that committee, which will be appointed and begin operating shortly. So the big question that will remain is that committee, and we've looked at the way other communities have done this for some indication. They will receive applications directly for projects that may be eligible for affordable housing funding. But we, as well as other communities, and we're hoping that they will see fit to allocate a significant amount of funding each year to the Housing Trust Fund. Judging from the way the town's budget is going to get tighter and tighter, we may have less opportunity for the annual free cash allocation from the regular town budget. And the CPA provides an opportunity not only to make up for that, but provide considerable amount of additional funding for affordable housing. And we've been able to develop a track record of, I think, very creditable use of the funding that we've gotten, mainly by leveraging the local funds with affordable housing sponsors who bring a great deal of state and federal funds to the table. So for every dollar that we put in from CPA or other sources, we're able to really leverage that up by many times and produce many more housing units, affordable housing units.
And I will say that in my time as a state rep, the one thing I've learned and the one thing I've really become to appreciate about housing, the thing I've learned is every affordable or subsidized housing project or program involves maybe a dozen different funding sources, all with their own requirements and regulations, and they just have these notebooks and notebooks and notebooks. And in fact, the folks who are putting together housing, new housing or housing renovations, they're really like experts in bureaucratic finance more than almost anything else. And I'm glad we have 12 different funding sources. If we only had 6, we'd have less money perhaps, but the amount of overhead that it sort of sucks up and the extra challenges, I don't think people who are in sort of other parts of society really appreciate the complexities that go into housing finance. So I learned that. And then the thing that is sort of obvious, but bears saying out loud, is housing is really expensive, which means every incremental unit of subsidized housing is also really expensive. And whereas we can hire a teacher for a year and educate 24 children for, say, $100,000, including overhead, right? It takes $500,000 to house a single family, right? And so the town needs partners in the state and the federal government, as well as nonprofits and for-profits, all swirling together to try to create more housing and maintain and sustain the housing we do have. And I just want to remind folks that housing is really expensive. And so it's very challenging to add addition. Doesn't mean we shouldn't add more housing, but that it's not as if there's 1,000 units ready to be built and the only problem is nobody wants them. In fact, we want them. The hard part is finding the funds to pay for them. And I just say that to remind folks about that, because I think sometimes we forget just how expensive it is. And that makes it hard for us to add as much as we want, as quickly as we want. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try and we shouldn't push. But I just want to sort of help people remember that.
And Tommy, in Brookline, to double down on the expense, land is unusually expensive in Brookline, which is the foundation, literally and financially, for the housing. We talk about an affordability gap between a market rate housing and an affordable housing, and it's well up in the $400,000, close to $500,000. Not the total cost, but just the difference between a market unit and affordable. You mentioned our partners. And they are financial partners to the town and the HAB, and skill set partners as well. And we're really fortunate to have entities that bring both to the table, both the Housing Authority and other nonprofits. And it's worth noting on the skill set side that the bylaw that defines the HAB actually defines a series of skill sets that we are supposed to have when we recruit and retain HAB members over time, and at all times, including finance and architecture and planning and design, for example, and law. So the HAB, when we vet the projects, we're sitting across from some pretty skilled people with sharp pencils, and we hope to have the same on our side of the table.
So much going on that we don't have a ton of time left, and there's so many things that I want to learn about and hear about. But the thing that I don't want to lose the opportunity to talk about is the housing production plan. And that word has sort of been talked about a lot in the last 6 months or a year. But many of us don't know what that actually means. Is that a term of art? Does that have a definition? And then what does it mean for Brookline? Tell us about housing production plan. Tell us about how it's going to come about and what the future of Brookline is with this housing production plan.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for providing the opportunity to do just that. And the timing of this show is perfect, since This past week has literally been the formal launch of what we are calling an updated housing production plan with the use of a terrific consulting team that many people will be becoming acquainted with over the coming months. I think the best way to explain this in a limited time is to start with the fact that the town undertook a housing production plan exactly 5 years ago. And so the answer to your question is almost two different answers. What was it then and what is it now going forward? The state defines the housing production plan in very explicit terms, and communities decide to undertake these plans and invest in them, typically for the purpose of arriving at the so-called magic 10% threshold under Chapter 40B, where if a city or town has less than 10% affordable housing, they are subject to the state and developers telling the town how big the developments are going to be. Many people that are watching your show are certainly familiar with that in North Brookline.
And this is the so-called 40B provision.
Right. And the state provided this housing production plan sort of opportunity to give cities and towns the method of, if they would create a plan that met the state's requirement, get it approved locally, and then have the state approve it, they would have a pathway and they would have to only develop so many units per year to get what was called a safe harbor, which meant that developers couldn't jam down large unwanted projects in the town so long as the town met that safe harbor production every year. That's exactly why we initiated this process to just kind of check the state's boxes and meet that requirement so that we could get 40B relief and have as much control of our own destiny over the last 5 years as possible. By all accounts, that was a success. At least in the sense that we are now just reaching the 10%. So why are we doing another housing production plan? This is an unusual version, even from the state's perspective, because we don't have to do one. We don't need the safe harbor or the protection, but the template and the framework that's provided under this production plan is a very kind of a handy means for us to proceed with a plan, with a consultant, with the essential features of a housing production plan in a post 10% environment. I think there's a large share of Brookline citizenry that wants to see the town continue its initiatives. Certainly the HAB wants to be a leader in that regard. So this current plan that's just beginning is to try to define where to from this point, from the 10%, how much, where, what kind of housing, what are the needs, there will be a huge amount, even more than last time, of community engagement in this plan and more imaginative outreach to those that haven't been reached before. There will be a formal needs assessment, and that there's a method for doing that that's understood by the consultant, prescribed by the state. That will lead into the reestablishment of new housing goals, both quantitative and qualitative. Again, this is a standard part of the housing production plan. Then another part, which is the development and updating of housing strategies. And this is going to have quite an emphasis on the rethinking of zoning and other regulatory changes, possible so-called friendly 40Bs that we get to decide what they're going to be, and attention to fair housing and the need for increased diversity and a good dose of education. All of those are required sort of headers for the state. We're adding one this time that got only minimal attention last time, and we're calling it location-based testing and recommendations. And our consulting team with community input is going to identify up to 15 specific locations. These could be anything from a municipal parking lot to the west part of the Newbury campus, to small segments of commercial corridors, such as in Brookline Village or Washington Square or on Harvard Street, a whole variety that could be eligible for mixed income housing development, mixed use, or various things that will meet the town's needs, but also understanding the relationship of those developments to the immediate neighborhoods and the various kinds of impacts that the development of different scales might have. So thanks for letting me give you a little bit of detail on that, because we want to get the community engagement as our consulting team reaches out on this. They include specialists in community engagement, as well as very highly regarded professional planners. And our goal is to get a positive melding of the community input, maximizing that, and a high degree of professionalism that the town will be able to respect the end work product. There will also be a website to keep track of a link of everything that is going on with the housing production plan. And so other than encouraging viewers to watch and engage, that website is be a good source of information, Tommy.
Well, there's so much going on in the community. And in fact, as you know, housing, land use, development, the community is becoming more engaged in this critical topic, in really thinking about what the shape, physical and demographic and otherwise, Brookline will have throughout the 21st century. It's really an exciting time, and I encourage folks to get involved either with a local advocacy group, with the HAB, with heck, the Zoning Board of Appeals could use a few good applicants, right? There's plenty of opportunity for folks to be involved. And of course, purely chatting with select board members, town meeting members, and others, tons of opportunity. Roger Blood from the HAB, thank you so much for coming on the show. Folks, you're watching TV on TV with me, Tommy Vitolo, and we're so glad you're on Brookline Interactive Group. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Tom.